people being trafficked around the globe. Take, for example, Waliswanda Masanda. Waliswanda Masanda, yes. According to the Robert Keener, a writer for CQ Global Research, in an article from October 21st, 2008, Waliswanda was with a couple of his friends, and they were fishing near their home in the southeastern country of Malawi. And what happened was, later in the afternoon, a couple of strangers pulled up and they said, "Hey, here's a job," and they offered them a job that they couldn't refuse. And so Waliswanda said, "Hey, I'll do it." And so he went with them to Tanzania, and he found out that he had made a mistake. He found out that he had to fish in a lake of the crocodile-infested Lake Lekwa for less than 25 cents a day. And so Waliswanda is one in millions of people being trafficked around the world. And so, but before I get into the human trafficking debate, I'm going to explain some definitions about human trafficking. So human trafficking is basically the recruiting, harboring, moving, or obtaining a person by forcing, frauding, or coercion. They're using force, they're forcing them, they're coercing them, they're deceiving them, and they're using them for sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, you name it. So, also another definition. So, according from the web page maintained by the U.S. Department of State entitled "Tiers, Placements, Guides, and Penalties for Tier 3 Countries" as of 2011, the Trafficking in Persons report is divided into 3 tiers. The first tier is that the countries are able to meet the minimum standards for the Trafficking in Persons report to combat human trafficking. The second tier is countries who are not under full compliance but have made significant effort, or they're going to make efforts. And the tier 2 watch list is countries who say, "Hey, we made efforts, but they have not given proof, and human trafficking is on the rise." And also tier 3 is countries who are not complying, who are not making any efforts at all. So how does this Trafficking in Persons report start? Well, in 2000, the UN adopts according to Keener, the UN adopts the Trafficking in Persons Protocol, which is the first binding system to define what human trafficking is and to criminalize it. And in 2002, the United States develops the first Trafficking in Persons report, which grades the nations on human trafficking, on their effectiveness in combating human trafficking. So many people are arguing whether human trafficking is good or not, whether effective. Well, some people are saying they're saying that government officials. U.S. sanctions aren't effective because other countries have made efforts to fight human trafficking. According to staff writers, a writer for the Facts on File News Services, in an article from November 17, 2008, the 10 out of 15 ranked 3 countries have made significant efforts to fight human trafficking, to be moved up down to rank 2. And the U.S. has enough influence to compel these countries to make adequate steps to fight human trafficking. And they're saying that they're not effective because they'll make the sanctioned country's economy worse. Because according to Alison Inkerth, a writer for the University of Iowa Spring, an article from 2011, it makes the the sanctioned countries to have black markets, and it also harms the people, not the government. So why am I so more people will benefit from unsanctioned countries because it'll stopping these sanctions and focusing on other areas will help free more people. And also, I attended this World International Conference, which was Women at Risk Conference on human trafficking 2 months ago, and I was shocked. And it was human trafficking is growing rampant around the world. So I want to believe and want to convince you that the U.S. should not impose human trafficking because the U.S. is able to change the sanctions able to change the sanctions to meet your own interests, and they're making the sanctioned country's economy worse and our economy worse. So the U.S. is able to change the sanctions to meet their own interests. So the U.S. does not impose sanctions on some countries, like, for example, Syria. Syria had a sanction in 1981. In 1981, the U.S. imposed a sanction on Syria, and according to Kurth again, the U.S. in 2003, the U.S. changed sanction rights on Syria through the Syrian Accountability and Lebanese Sovereignty Restoration Act, which is the SAA in 2003, which allowed the use of coke products and cars. They allowed the trade for them. And so, according to Keener, Shelley states all countries are not treated equally in the report. It is still sought in some countries, such as the Gulf states. And according to issues and controversies, when it fits the U.S. interests, the U.S. will impose sanctions on a given country. Like Liberia and Sudan are, for example, they fit the U.S. U.S. interest for trading, so why not? So the U.S. is pulling off sanctions off of tier 3 countries. Like, according to Josh Kershaw, a writer for the National Journal, in an article from 2013, Obama is pulling sanctions off of Iran and letting them continue their nuclear program just to be able to trade with them. And as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that most recently pro-Israel organizations have been highly critical of a possible diplomatic deal with Iran that would loosen the sanctions against the Islamic regime, which would be exceedingly bad. So the U.S. sanctions are making the sanctioned country's economy worse. Like, according to issues and controversy, if the U.S. imposes sanctions on countries like African countries, then or whatever countries out there, then it will make it will harm the people, not the government, because they'll become desperate. They're poor. They become poor, so they've got to do something, right? And so Jody Jacobson, executive director of the Center for Health and Gender Equality, says you have to look at this issue not just as legal or sanctions, but really as a socio-economic issue. And unless you're willing to approach it from this angle and really look at the context in which this is happening, we're really not going to address this issue effectively. So Linda Mimba, let me tell you another story about her. She was lured from her home in Uganda, and she wanted to become a retail clerk. Well, they forced her into prostitution, and she became pregnant, contracted HIV, and worse, had a miscarriage. So, sanctions are increasing child labor in sanctioned countries. According to Keener, in 2006, Bangladesh banned children in textile factories because of the international pressure of being sanctioned. And Cambodian human rights activist says until more governments introduce stricter child labor laws and give children back their lives, these children and the children they'll someday have will be doomed. And so U.S. sanctions are making our economy worse. According to Kurth again, in 1995, economic sanctions cost the U.S. $15 or $19 billion because the U.S. sanctions 26 countries. And this made us lose 200,000 jobs. So in the U.S., they're also affecting businesses as well. U.S. sanctions on trade will decrease foreign confidence on the reliability of U.S. companies. And the Fair Labor Association examined Nestle's company, cocoa supply company, chain, and they found out that child laborers were harvesting and processing their cocoa plants. And so, in conclusion, U.S. should not impose human sanctions on other countries. What?
I gotta cut you off. You're 11.
I'm 11.